The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So much going on these days, so much to comment on. And at this time, I would like to yield such time as she may consume to my friend from Iowa whenever she is ready.
Thank you, Representative. Accomplishments of an incredible athlete from Iowa's 2nd District. Kevin McKee of Davenport recently finished competing in the Beijing 2020 Paralympics, where he won a gold medal in sled hockey. Kevin has proudly represented the United States for over a decade, winning gold medals in the last 3 Paralympics. Kevin has always had a passion for sports, playing tennis in high school and wheelchair basketball in college. However, Kevin soon realized his passion for sled hockey in 2020 when he started playing on the sled hockey club team with the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago. Beginning in 1960, the Paralympic Games are held every 4 years and feature a wide range of athletes with different physical abilities, including impaired muscle power, impaired passive range of motion, limb deficiency, leg length difference, hypertonia, ataxia, athetosis, vision impairment, and intellectual impairment. The Paralympics are also held immediately the respective Summer and Winter Olympic Games. Paralympians like Kevin show all of us that with hard work, dedication, and the drive to succeed, anything is possible. Congratulations, Kevin, on an outstanding performance, and I look forward to cheering you on in the future. Thank you, Mr. Representative. Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
And I thank the lady, and I notice the skill and adroitness of Ms. Miller making her way hurriedly around the rows, through the rows. Must have picked up something from such a great hockey player. But I want to turn my attention to some recent criticisms of an amazing man. I agree with some who have clerked at the Supreme Court that Justice Clarence Thomas may be easily the most intelligent justice on the court. That fact actually turned him from his days at Yale Law School. Actually, he started Harvard for, I think, a day or so, but he felt like Harvard was too conservative, so he dropped out, applied to Yale, and was pleased, it seemed, more liberal in its thinking. But Yale was able to take a brilliant person like that, and according to his book, he began to notice how liberals who were white seemed to look down on him with an arrogant view of Clarence Thomas that, gee, if it weren't for us liberals, a black man like Clarence Thomas would not have even gotten into this school, when actually he had the raw intelligence to do that regardless, and had done well everywhere he had been, including Holy Cross, when he originally went there thinking he might be a priest at some point. Those are my recollections from his autobiography, a splendid read, My Grandfather's Son. But that kind of arrogance, looking down on him like he couldn't do this on his own if it weren't for us liberals, turned him off. And that, along with other issues, drove him to become quite conservative. And the clarity with which he sees issues is a real treasure for the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, just as when he was nominated to the Supreme Court, he's come under grave attacks from these same liberals that used to look down on him when he was a liberal, thinking he couldn't possibly be as smart as they were, when actually he exceeded their level of intelligence. But that was what was called a soft form of discrimination. What he's experienced in the hearings for his confirmation since he's been on the U.S. Supreme Court clearly has not been soft discrimination. It has been overt, radical, mean-spirited, evil discrimination. Nothing soft about it. How dare that man come off the plantation and dare to have any point of view that was not provided to him by other liberals. Man thinks for himself, and he is brilliant. And these same liberals that are now coming after him seek not only to discriminate against him because he's a black conservative who's brilliant, but they also want to assert a marriage penalty against him because his wife also thinks for herself. Now, there's a great article written by Mark Paoletta, and this is dated March 11th. I won't go through the whole article, but he says, D.C. Circuit Judge Nina Pillard, for example, voted not to rehear a case rejecting President Trump's refusal to produce his tax returns in response to a congressional subpoena. That was exactly what her husband, the ACLU's litigation director, advocated in an article reviewing the lower court decision. Now, Justice Thomas is being told he needs to recuse himself because he has a wife who thinks for herself. We can't have that, these liberals say. Yet the hypocrisy rises higher and higher with every comment they make about Justice Thomas and or his wife. Ninth Circuit Judge Stephen Reinhart, a liberal icon, participated in a case even after his wife, the chief of an ACLU chapter, commented on the lower court opinion. Her ACLU chapter even submitted a brief to the district court. Reinhart defended his decision not to recuse, writing his wife's, quote, "views are hers, not mine. I do not in any way condition my opinions on the position she takes regarding any issues," unquote, even though he took the same position that his wife took. The article said ethics experts defended Reinhart's decision, noting that, quote, Judge Reinhart is not presumed to be the reservoir and carrier of his wife's beliefs. A contrary outcome would deem a judge's spouse unable to hold most any position of advocacy, creating what amounts to a marriage penalty. Exactly. and liberals will not apply that standard to liberals, and yet they come after Justice Thomas with their fangs bared, viciously attacking him and his wife. What happened to the old ideas of liberals being these caring, compassionate people who would never judge one spouse by the acts or thoughts of the other? Well, those have gone by the wayside, and we see exactly what's at play here. Article says the Supreme Court has long rejected this marriage penalty. Further down it says, while any lower court can substitute a recused judge with another judge, there is no one to replace a Supreme Court justice who recuses. And that's what we lost my constitutional law professor in the last year. David Gwynn, he was a tough professor, but a great teacher, and he continued to be an incredible resource up to the end of his life. And he used to say, there's only one court that owes its existence wholly to the U.S. Constitution. Of course, that's the U.S. Supreme Court. All other courts, as he would say, rely completely on the auspices of the Congress for their existence, for their continued existence, and for their jurisdiction. So it is interesting to look at this, and it's a great point that is being made by some scholars. Since the Supreme Court is set up as a separate branch, that's actually the one that Congress does not have authority to set up rules for recusal for the Supreme Court. This article, Mr. Paletta, says, consistent with the court's policy, even though Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's husband, Marty Ginsburg, practiced law at a firm that represented parties before the Supreme Court, Justice Ginsburg never recused herself. Law professor Jane Ginsburg, the justice's daughter, wrote an article about a case pending before the Supreme Court. The petitioner even cited Jane's article in his brief, and Justice Ginsburg voted for the result advocated by her daughter. Marty Ginsburg solved a complex tax problem for his client, Ross Perot's company, EDS, and Perot endowed a chair named after Marty Ginsburg at Georgetown University Law Center, where Perot and EDS appeared several times, or when Perot and EDS appeared several times before the Supreme Court. Justice Ginsburg did not recuse, nor was she required to, and I would add, nor did any of these people attacking the black conservative Justice Thomas bother to advocate their new position back then. If reporters mean to tighten recusal standards, they should prepare to levy a marriage penalty on all judges' spouses, not just the Thomases. But the press now singles out Justice Thomas, calling on him to recuse because of his wife's activities. Jenny Thomas is a longtime conservative activist who works with groups that take public positions on issues and sometimes even file amicus briefs at the Supreme Court. But unlike the spouses and children of other judges, Jenny Thomas does not practice law, much less write briefs. She merely builds conservative coalitions to pursue shared political aims. None of her activities require Justice Thomas to recuse. Even so, the press criticized Jenny Thomas for honoring conservative leaders at awards luncheons because those individuals subsequently filed amicus briefs at the Supreme Court. Historically, this has not required recusal. Ginsburg once donated an autographed copy of her VMI opinion to the pro-abortion Now Political Action Committee, which auctioned off the opinion at a fundraiser in 1997. Moreover, in 2004, she spoke at a lecture named after herself for the Now Legal Defense Fund. That's the National Association of Women, on whose board she served in the 1970s. 2 weeks before that lecture, Justice Ginsburg voted in favor of a position advocated by now the National Association of Women, or Organization of Women Legal Defense Fund, in an amicus brief. None of those activities required Ginsburg to recuse, but the press has attacked Justice Thomas for stoking concerns of a hyper-partisan court by attending conservative events. Thomas's critics conveniently ignore the numerous instances of liberal justices attending similar events, such as Justice Sotomayor giving speeches to the Liberal American Constitution Society. These recent stories have also ignored Justice Ginsburg's partisan attack on Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential campaign. The justice called him a faker and criticized him for not disclosing his tax returns. She even voiced concerns about Trump being president. The day after he was elected, Ginsburg again objected by wearing a collar that traditionally signaled she would be dissenting in a case, though there were no cases handed down that day. Yet she sat on a case challenging a congressional subpoena for President Trump's tax returns, and she decided plenty of other cases involving President Trump and his administration. No one talked about impeaching Justice Ginsburg for her conduct. The media are weaponizing baseless ethics charges to smear a conservative black justice. Justice Thomas infuriates them because he expresses views they consider unacceptable for a black man to hold, and because an increasing number of justices are aligned with those views and may be ready to issue rulings that undercut long-standing liberal precedents, but going after his wife is despicable, and it won't work. So it's also interesting that the majority in H.R. 1 attempts to go after, without naming Justice Thomas, it requires the Judicial Conference of the United States, which is chaired by the Chief Justice, to establish a mandatory code of conduct for the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. This is potentially unconstitutional, and this is according to testimony before Congress by Hans von Spassky, and he makes a good point. Article 3 states that the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The Constitution, not Congress, created the Supreme Court. It is an independent, co-equal branch. In the same way that the justices cannot dictate what ethics rules apply to members of Congress or the president, it's highly questionable whether Congress can dictate the ethics rules that apply to the Supreme Court. Since the Judicial Conference was established by Congress, quote, for the benefit of the courts it created, and is, quote, an instrument for the management of the lower federal courts, its committees have no mandate to prescribe rules or standards for any other body, unquote. According to the Chief Justice, justices use the current code of conduct for the lower courts as guidance, as well as, quote, a wide variety of other authorities to resolve specific ethics issues, unquote. Supreme Court has, quote, never addressed whether Congress may impose those requirements on the Supreme Court, unquote. But serious constitutional problem under Article 3 with Congress trying to impose such mandates on the justices, although they comply with the current provisions voluntarily. So very good points, but just interesting how selective things have gotten. Now, most judges and most judicial standards will indicate that if a justice has spoken out and taken a position on a case that has come or is before the court, it indicates an opinion before the case has concluded that that justice should be recused. But we know two of the Supreme Court justices actually appeared, performed weddings, same-sex weddings, before they came out with their opinion. So that certainly seemed to raise questions that people attacking Justice Thomas never actually raised back during those days. And it was interesting to be in here and hear the colloquy between the majority leader and the majority whip, and hear the majority leader go back to the allegations raised by President Biden about all these leases that are not being utilized for drilling. Quite interesting, because, you know, there are some very legitimate reasons about why they're not utilized. And one of the things that has done tremendous damage to investment in additional wells, for one thing, there's been encouragement. You know, banks look the other way. Do not get involved in fossil fuel development, which is rather interesting. Could lead to our own demise as a republic, when we have been the most blessed country when it comes to natural resources of any country of which I'm aware. The whole world is jealous, and yet we routinely put off limits those very resources that we desperately need, even though we produce them more cleanly for the environment than any other country that we're buying them from, particularly China, Russia, others that have gotten control some in Africa. But one article here by Peter Hassan about Biden's misleading spin about oil production under him versus Trump. The White House framing omits a key fact. While domestic oil production in 2021 was higher than it was in 2017, it was lower than it was in 2018, 2019, and 2020, federal statistics show. And the significant reason for that is that drilling doesn't occur overnight. Production doesn't occur overnight. It is a work in progress. So that one president, when he comes into office, actually inherits the preparation to drill or the killing of drilling by the prior president. So when President Trump took office, his first year, the drilling numbers were a result and production numbers were a result of what had happened before he took office. And thus, when President Biden takes credit for production numbers in his first year, of course, he doesn't want to acknowledge, but those were a result of actions taken during the Trump administration. But after that, he does deserve to get credit for the damage or the good that is done. An article by Thomas Barabi and Ariel Zilber points out that if President Joe Biden came out forcefully on the side of increasing U.S. oil production, the price of a barrel could fall quickly, experts told the New York Post, even if it takes a while to bring that new energy online. Just look at what happened Wednesday. This article's from March 9th. In the wake of the United Arab Emirates and Iraq saying they'd up production by an estimated 800 barrels a day. The global price of oil dropped by $22 a barrel within minutes. If Biden signaled full-throated support for U.S. drillers to get to work and perhaps allowed the restarting of the Keystone XL pipeline from Canada, global oil prices could similarly fall sharply, the industry experts told the Post. Now, I have noticed that when there's good news about production of oil or natural gas, that the price doesn't fall quite as quickly as it goes up after bad news. But it should be noted that after years of not replacing oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve of Oil, the SPRO, President Trump not only saw to it that America became energy independent for the first time in decades, but they started putting oil in that Strategic Petroleum Reserve so that in the event of an emergency, we would have oil to keep going. It was not put there for a president that's done damage to our ability to produce what we need, to try to get out from under the criticisms from people that can't afford where he has driven the price of energy. And in fact, I would humbly submit that by President Biden's starting to take 1 million barrels of oil per day from that Strategic Petroleum Reserve, he's setting America up for a catastrophe. because there are interruptions in the production of oil and natural gas. They come time to time, and especially when there is war activity. Now, President Biden used a claim that this is a wartime emergency. Yet, under our Constitution, only the U.S. Congress has the authority to declare war, and no such war has been declared. And in fact, President Biden has made very clear we're not putting troops in Ukraine. And I was hearing on news today that actually things that were announced by this administration that would be helping Ukraine fight off Russia have not arrived. They were announcements, but the help that was supposed to be coming from the United States has not come that will help them fight off Russia. So we can hear all the grand pronouncements about how evil Putin is, but at times, they're just that. They're pronouncements because we're not giving the help to Ukraine that's being promised. Is this some kind of show without putting actions behind it? A lot of the Ukrainians think so when they look at the Biden administration, because they're desperate. They're fighting with all they have. And I heard the majority leader casting aspersions at Republicans, thinking Putin is some great guy. He's a thug. And yet, who was it that put back in Putin's head that the United States has no problem with him attacking innocent countries and invading innocent countries? Well, we can go back in the second half of the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration, when President Bush and Secretary Condoleezza Rice got upset, as many of us did, when Putin's Russia invaded the country of Georgia. And he slapped some very serious sanctions on Russia to try to send a message, don't go invading other countries. So when Biden became vice president, Obama became president, one of the first things they did, they sent a Secretary of State named Clinton with a red plastic button that they misnamed in Russian. They meant to call it a reset button, but the people working for the Obama-Biden administration and for Secretary Clinton were not smart enough to properly translate the word, so it didn't mean reset. But they went over there with the intention of sending a message that, President Bush, he overreacted when you attacked Georgia. And the message from Obama, Biden, Clinton was, we won't overreact like that when you invade countries you shouldn't. We won't. We don't have a problem with it. Bush, that was Bush. That was Condoleezza Rice. They had a problem with your invading Georgia, but we don't have a problem like that. What was Putin supposed to think? Exactly what he thought. Number one, this Biden, Obama, Clinton, they're weak people. And they're giving me a green light to invade Crimea, which he did. And what happened? Nothing. Obama-Biden administration sent blankets over there. It's hard to stop a tank with a blanket. That's what was sent. But the message, Putin got that message. And then Trump comes in, and he can say flattering things about Putin, but he knew that Putin is not stupid, and he knew that he could be vicious, and he made very clear, you don't invade under my administration or you will pay a big price. But once President Trump was gone, and we got back to the old policies of the Obama-Biden administration, Putin knew he had a president that he could push around. And that was accented when President Biden telegraphed that, we could be okay with the minor incursion. If it's just a small invasion, we probably wouldn't even react. That was the message that was heard in Russia. And, at times it's almost as if there are people in this administration that have been paid off by Russia. Well, I guess some people in the Biden family have been paid off. But that's another matter. It's times, though, it does seem like with the change in policy of standing firmly against China's devastating activity when it comes to stealing our secrets, patents, copyrights, and the lack of action by this administration, it does seem like, it makes you wonder, is somebody getting paid off in this administration? And then you realize, oh yeah, the Biden family's made a lot of money from China. So, people want to talk about Clarence Thomas maybe should recuse himself. I wish they'd apply those standards to people who benefit in this administration from the failure to stop China. In any event, just mark my words, this administration, President Biden, releasing 1 million barrels of oil a day from our strategic petroleum reserve is really going to come back to hurt us when we're in an emergency situation and we need that oil. It's not going to be there because President Biden was hoping he could ameliorate some of the anger of voters by the prices that we're seeing at the gas pump, the prices we're seeing in inflation, because that's the thing. When energy prices go up, it affects every price. Because food, the things we use to stay warm or to house ourselves, even cars cannot, even electric cars cannot be produced without the use of fossil fuel. Can't. They will someday, but they can't right now. You got to have fossil fuel or you cannot make a car. Not for production, not cheap enough to be bought by the American public. So, I know, and it's been, since I've been here in Congress, I filed a bill to have a huge cash prize to anyone who could develop a type of battery, capacitor, some way to hold megawattage of electricity for at least 30 days without significant loss. Because one of these days, somebody is going to come up with that. An ability to hold electricity. When that happens, we won't need fossil fuel at all. And whoever comes up with the way to do that is going to be mega wealthy. Heck, once we have that ability, we should be able to capture lightning. There are all kinds of ways we can have energy. And I know I've been told, oh, no, we already can capture energy because some place they have water in a lower reservoir, and during off-peak times, they pump the water up to a higher reservoir so that during peak times, they have the water flow down, and that turns turbines, and that produces electricity. Yeah, that's storing energy, but it's not storing electricity. That energy has to then be converted back into electricity by turning the turbines. But someday we're going to have the ability to have energy held in massive quantities. But right now we don't have that ability. And the batteries that are being used in vehicles, we're headed for all kinds of headaches when enough people buy electric vehicles, and we have to do something with all of those toxic batteries. It's going to be bad. It's going to be horrendous for the environment if too many people start buying electric vehicles. So there's a great article by Kevin O'Scanlan in March this year entitled "The Red Herring of Unused Leases," which is what Majority Leader brought up. Says, the fact is natural gas and oil companies hold numbers of, quote, non-producing leases, which is far different from the claim of, quote, unused, unquote, leases mentioned by the White House and by our Majority Leader. Here's some key numbers. 1,548, that's the number of non-producing offshore leases according to the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. 13,000, that's the approximate number of non-producing onshore leases according to the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. But the context says non-producing means exactly that. These are leases that have not yet been developed to the point of actual production. The average time from onshore lease sale to production is 3 to 4 years. 7 to 10 years for offshore leases. And those that have not produced commercial volumes of oil and gas. Polling released last week shows that Americans know the stakes involved overseas and at home. They overwhelmingly support, by 90% margin, increased U.S. production over reliance on foreign energy. That means lawmakers and regulators need to address that. First, by some members of the Biden administration, including White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, on Thursday, is that American oil and natural gas producers are sitting on hundreds of unused federal leases and do not need access to more. The second, by some industry opponents, is that ramping up U.S. production will not help the Ukrainian people today. Psaki has made the claim about unused federal leases before. It's become a line at the White House. When pressed to explain why it isn't doing more to support American oil and gas production. With soaring demand putting upward pressure on prices and much of Europe at the mercy of its top energy provider, Russia. Well, here's key facts about federal leases. The law already requires companies to either produce oil and or gas on leases or return the leases to the government, the so-called use it or lose it provision. It's already in there. Generally, it's required in the first 10 years. When a company acquires a lease, It makes a significant financial investment at the beginning of the lease in the form of a non-refundable bonus bid and pays additional rent until and unless it begins producing. For federal onshore, Mineral Leasing Act prevents any one company from locking up unproductive, excessive federal acreage. Developing a lease takes years and substantial effort to determine whether the underlying geology holds commercial quantities of oil and gas. The lengthy process to develop them from lease is often extended by administrative and legal challenges at every step along the way. Every company is familiar with lawfare. Going to court, being dragged repeatedly into court to try to stop the use of a lease. The argument about unused leases is a red herring, a smokescreen for energy policies that have had a hamstringing effect on the world's leading producer of natural gas and oil. It suggests American producers have been motivated by a desire to manipulate the market during the current crisis in Europe. This is false. American oil and gas producers are able and willing to do their part to support American energy leadership, including providing energy that can help allies abroad. Ultimately, energy policies affect the energy investment climate. Specifically, they impact the ability of producers, typically accountable to shareholders, to take the risks involved in spending billions of dollars to find and develop oil and gas. Mischaracterizing the way federal leases work does not help foster new investment nor risk-taking. The time for helping Ukraine and American energy was months ago. Then Biden administration support for robust U.S. production might have helped deter Moscow from thinking that European nations were so dependent on Russian energy they might do less to oppose Russia as the aggressor. Instead, the administration discouraged American energy. For more than a year, it has halted new federal leasing, key to future energy investment and production. It canceled energy infrastructure, blocked development in parts of Alaska, entertained new taxes to punish the U.S. energy industry, and chilled future investment by signaling that oil and gas would not be part of America's future energy mix. All last summer, the administration called on OPEC plus the oil cartel to increase its production more rapidly in the face of rising energy costs, bypassing the American producers. Let me go back and mention, readdress Anwar. We lost Don Young, had a wonderful service tribute to him. It was a great funeral, great service for a great man. Don Young, I got to sit beside him for years in natural resources because I became the second most senior person on natural resources. And since I made Republican leaders mad, they were not going to allow me to be chairman. And so we sit by seniority. So I sat by Don Young for years. And Don would get so upset when people would pretend to speak for tribal groups in Alaska or for the Alaskan people and saying they don't want Anwar. Well, there was one little tribe that didn't, but the rest sure did. And he would take members of Congress on trips to Anwar. So much of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge area that was designated by the Carter administration It is beautiful. It is pristine. There's wildlife in abundance. But Don always wanted to make sure that anybody that would listen and cared to know the truth could see for themselves in Alaska, okay, here's this massive wildlife area that's been set apart by Congress. Well, here's this little bitty area comparatively where the Carter administration said, you know what, there's nothing there, nothing can live there. This is a great spot, we'll allow drilling here. Yet for decades, drilling was not allowed in the one place that it would have been okay to have drilling. And when the Trump administration says, hey, there was a designated place, and despite commercials where you see all this wonderful wildlife, that's not in the part designated for drilling. All the beautiful mountains and all, it's just, that's not the part designated by President Carter for drilling. And it would bless the heck out of Alaska and their people because of the revenue it would bring. It would be a blessing for America to further be independent and to further have the ability to encourage countries like Ukraine and to discourage countries like Russia from picking on them because we have enough of the energy needs. We can fill enough energy needs. They don't have to worry about begging a ruthless dictator like Putin has become. Yet, year after year, we've had people trying to stop it, and then once Biden was sworn in as president, he did the same thing. No, we're going to put that back off limit. It's really a shame. This article says the current situation is a reminder that American energy abundance requires foresight and planning, investment, and policy support. This is the path to sound energy policy that keeps America safe and strong and allows American energy to support its allies. And I'm hoping, since I'm not going to be in the next Congress, I'm hoping that the bill I filed years ago that would provide a big cash prize to whoever comes up with the method of storing massive amounts of electricity for long periods of time efficiently. I'm hoping that that won't be so futuristic that we couldn't have a majority actually pass that. Because once we do that, there's no need for fossil fuels. We'll have all the energy we need, and you could even produce cars. And let's face it, natural gas is such an important feedstock for so many of the products we use every day that we have come to rely on as necessities, as essential, including things in vehicles themselves. And in fact, in Texas, our air and water have been getting cleaner year by year, and a lot of that is due to moving from oil and coal into natural gas, much cleaner. In fact, here are some oil and gas facts. In March of 2020, before the lockdowns began, the United States reached its highest level of energy production by January 2021. For the first time in nearly 50 years, U.S. was producing more oil than we were consuming. In just over a year, we've seen a 4% surplus of domestic oil and gas production fall to 4% oil and gas deficit. President Biden directed the Secretary of the Interior to halt new oil and gas leases on public lands and waters. President Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have transported 830,000 barrels of oil per day from Alberta to refineries on the Gulf Coast of Texas. The Biden administration has created significant regulatory uncertainty by threatening new, excessive, burdensome regulations on the oil and gas industry, including the EPA methane rule and the DOI waste prevention rule. The Biden administration has rescinded Trump administration permitting improvements, including the NEPA reforms, the WOTUS reforms, and the ESA reforms. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has failed to approve natural gas pipeline applications, leading to a backlog of pending applications that discourage economic growth and new energy development. U.S. Department of Interior scrapped the Trump administration decision that authorized expanded leasing and development in the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge and the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. The price of gasoline has risen from an average of $2.38 under President Trump to approximately $3.53 today. Well, it's a lot higher than that. I noticed we're around $5 around here. This is the largest year-over-year price rise in 30 years and leaves little room to absorb the impact of potential massive oil and gas sanctions on Russia. So those are some facts, and I want to touch on one other matter here regarding, well, this is the name of the article, Republicans Expose Uncommon CDC Teachers Union's Ties on COVID School Reopening Guidance in Report. And this is from Jessica Chasmiller, March 30th. Republicans accuse Walensky, Dr. Walensky, of downplaying the degree to which CDC departed from past practice to allow AFT to affect the policymaking process. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC officials' testimony claimed that the agency coordinated with teachers' unions at an extraordinary level in crafting its school reopening guidance, despite the agency's earlier claims that such coordination was routine and non-political. Republicans wrote that emails between the American Federation of Teachers, the White House, and the CDC showed that the AFT's cozy relationship with the Biden administration's political leadership at the CDC positioned the union to impose line-by-line edits to the reopening guidance, despite CDC's past practice to keep draft guidance confidential. So we find out the mental and physical suffering of children due to 2 years of closed schools in some places. We can, again, go back to some of the teachers' unions that helped bring that about. And article from Daily Caller, Nicole Silverio. Apparently, NBC actually edited photos of Leah Thomas to look more like a woman. That's what Erica Denhoff alleged in the NBC's Today show. They photoshopped her work to make transgender swimmer Leah Thomas look more feminine. And then this has application to January 6th, work by the FBI. We still need to get to the bottom. Those who committed crimes, harmed the Capitol, need to be punished. But those that didn't. So many appear to be sought and persecuted, not just prosecuted. It's gotten kind of strange. But Julie Kelly has a March 10th article about the Governor Gretchen Whitmer alleged kidnapping plot and the trial that was going on about that. And it became clear during opening statements the defense could not argue their case without explaining the deep involvement of the FBI's confidential human resources. So the judge reversed his ruling, telling the jury it won't be possible to draw a line between the government proving their case and entrapment. One FBI official told his supervisor he planned to conduct a terrorism enterprise investigation into the loose band of misfits with no solid plans, much less ability to do anything nefarious at that time. The alleged ringleader, Adam Fox, lived in a ramshackle basement of a vacuum repair shop with his 2 dogs. If he needed to go to the bathroom or brush his teeth, he had to use facilities at the Mexican restaurant next door. But secret gatherings and out-of-town excursions, courtesy of the FBI and U.S. taxpayers, animated the scheme. And then she goes on to explain the extent to which the FBI and U.S. taxpayers paid to have meetings to try to bring the conspiracy to kidnap Governor Whitmer into actually going forward. And it really is shocking and does raise a serious question. When you have a dozen or so FBI informants or employed people, many getting paid in cash and benefits, tens of thousands of dollars, is it a plot then by the FBI, or is it really a plot by the people that didn't have the ability without the FBI to do anything about it? So it's a sad time when the FBI seems to be using taxpayer resources to create events that would not happen without their involvement. So there's a lot of oversight that needs to be done, a lot of house cleaning that needs to be done. It doesn't look like that will be happening anytime soon. I'm grateful that we're beginning to see again some of our friends across the aisle getting back to basics and concern about civil rights that have been abused by government entities. But we've got a lot of work to do, and I hope that we will at least come together in stopping the federal government from being the source from which criminal plots are made available and potentially real. And Madam Speaker, with that, I would yield back.